Every month we deep dive into one area of focus, and this month we're going to find out how to talk to customers and learn if your new business, your new product, your new feature is worthwhile. If it's worthwhile when everybody is lying to you. And what we want to get out of today is, after today, you will walk away with a set of simple rules for crafting good questions that will help you better understand your customer, understand how to frame a meeting, and avoid your own bias. You'll get to meet loads of other founders on the journey, which is a highlight for me always. And 2 lucky winners with great questions will walk away with a hard copy of the Mom Test, which is always nice to have a giveaway. The agenda today is simple. We'll go straight to discussion with Rob in about 2 minutes. We'll then go into breakout rooms and we'll come back for a Q&A afterwards. During the session, make sure you fire all of your questions into the chat. I'll keep an eye on them here. So, our guest today is a tech entrepreneur with over a decade really investigating how to get good quality information from customers before we start building anything. He started out as a programmer, much happier behind the screen than in front of it, but he learned in his previous startup the do's and don'ts of enterprise sale. But what I suppose he found was that it's not as easy as they say in the books. Today, delighted to welcome Rob Fitzpatrick to the Founder Circle, author of The Mom Test. Welcome.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and I'm excited to be here.
Super stuff. So we might tear in, so let's dive in. So in the Mom Test, you say never to ask your mom if your idea is a good one, right? Because she loves you and she will say yes. And it's true, as a mom, you are right. But you also say don't ask that question to anyone because it's a bad question. Rob, can you tell me how you learned this lesson?
When my first company, we went through Y Combinator. This was back in 2007. And then we raised money for some pretty good investors out in London where we were trying to build the company. And around that time, we pivoted from being a consumer-facing company. We're building animation tech. And originally, we wanted to provide it directly to kids and to teens who were, make their own cartoons. And after we raised the funding, we pivoted to more a business-to-business model where we were kind of licensing and white labeling the tech. That meant that someone on our tech and design heavy team needed to go figure out sales. And I ended up drawing the short straw, and that was me. And our investors were wonderful. They treated us really well. But for them, sales was natural. And they kept saying, just go talk to customers. And Paul Graham from YC, he said the same thing, just go ask your customers. And I did that. I tried so hard. And I say, what should we build? And there was one memorable event. Our first customer that was paying us, significant money was MTV. And they kept saying, we want a dashboard. Give us an analytics dashboard so we can see how people are, making the cartoons, engaging with them. It was basically being used for advertising. And I said, okay, that's going to be tricky. We can do that 3 months. And they sort of rolled their eyes. And 3 months later, I brought it to them. Here's this amazing dashboard we built. And a week later, they said, hey, could you send us our stats? And I was so frustrated. Look, we built you this dashboard. You can look at it yourself. Here's your password. And the next week, they said again, hey, can you send me your stats? And this went on for a few weeks, and I became frustrated. And so I said, why do you want me to email this to you? Like, we built exactly the feature that you wanted.
And they have been previously appointed because this was something.
I think there's someone that's not on mute.
Can everyone please mute?
Go on mute, please.
We also need to appoint a different agency to represent Repco on site because it can't be the same company. And that's
it does sound fascinating.
Okay,
I don't know who it is, but can everybody go on mute, please?
I've agreed a setup fee. Sorry, Daryl has agreed a setup fee, whereas if we pay them 15,000 rand, they'll sort the construction work permit. No. They'll go and sit in the department.
Can we mute everyone for that?
I cannot mute everyone.
Right.
And I cannot find this person, unfortunately.
Oh, hello. Wait. Yes, wonderful. Thank you. Great stuff.
All right. So the takeaway is that we built exactly what our actual customers told us to build, and then they never used the feature. And when I said, why didn't you use this? We burned 3 months of engineering time on this. They said, actually, we didn't really care about the analytics. We just needed a report that looked good to send to our clients. And I realized that by failing to ask why they wanted it, by failing to understand their motivations and just taking what they said at face value, I'd essentially burned more than 150 grand worth of funding, right? Because I'd put my team on this task that didn't matter. And I was like, wow, that was dilution I didn't need to take. That was like time we lost that we're never getting back. And so that was really the turning point for me, where I was like, okay, you can't expect anyone else to tell you the truth. You need to figure out how to ask the questions so that you're told the truth. Like, take responsibility for finding the truth. Don't expect other people to give it to you. It's just about how you frame the conversation and how you structure the questions, which is, you know, what's the mom test is about.
Tell me, I think that's a hard lesson learned, right? That's 4 months of time burnt.
And not just my time, the whole engineering team's time, right? That's expensive.
It's expensive, yeah. Especially when like the intern could have done it in 4 hours. It just seems, yeah, I mean, I know I've made that mistake. Can you talk us through, because I know there's loads of people on this call that know the mom test, but some that don't. How do you fail the mom test?
So there's a few different sources of biases and lies. So you think you ask people for feedback, you get feedback, but not all feedback is equal. So the way you ask the questions, you can ask bad questions, you get bad data. So for example, the most common, and both salespeople and technical people do this, is they start with a pitch. Say, hey, I've got an incredible idea. We're going to change the world. It's so visionary. You give the big pitch. What's the other person expected to say there? You've put your heart on the table. You've shown that you really care. You're emotionally vulnerable. Also, like, they're going to say, yeah, they're going to say, wow, that sounds great. Yeah, that's so innovative. Yeah, why doesn't this already exist? And then in your head, that gets twisted. And this is the second source of bias, is misremembering. So people typically, telling the truth is an emotionally demanding task. And so unless you make it easy for the other person, they're not going to see their job as telling you the truth. They're going to see their job as getting through the conversation as easily and comfortably as possible. And usually that involves polite lies. Oh yeah, so innovative. Oh yeah, we'd love it. Oh yeah, we definitely use it. These sort of hypothetical, maybe non-commitments, very, very common. And so once you start noticing these compliments, whenever you get a compliment, like let's say you're doing something around email security. Email security, we're going to change it. We're going to fix it. Everyone's like, wow, yeah, amazing. Our company definitely needs this. If you just flip that and you say, well, what are you doing about email security right now? And they say literally nothing. It's like, why not? And they're like, actually, it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but we just don't care. And so by that one little change, by not talking about your idea and instead asking what they're already doing and why, you suddenly start getting much, much better information. Now, it's not about your product, it's about the customer's life. And this is kind of like the crux of how you get better data. Stop asking about your idea and start asking about what your customers are already doing and why.
I have the good and bad questions printed out on my desk. So we've touched on a couple of the bad ones, but I know that one bad one that I have sinfully asked many times in the past is, would you buy a product that did Y, or would you buy X for this amount? Can you talk us through why they're bad questions?
So if you're actually ready to take people's money, it's a great question because you're asking them for money and you're putting them to a purchase decision. But often founders ask that before they're ready to sell anything. And it's a very hypothetical. It's like making a New Year's resolution. It's an empty promise, and it's outside of the context of a real buying decision. So I was talking to a woman who ran a creative agency, and I was building some software, considering building some software. And we did the normal cuts dev. I learned all about her life. It really seemed like she had the problem. And at a certain point, I asked for permission to switch into kind of a pitch and demo conversation. It's like, hey, I'm working on this thing. If you've got another 10 minutes, I'd love to tell you about it, but no pressure if not. She said, yeah, this is really important. Tell me. And I gave her the idea and she got so excited. She's like, yes, this is exactly what we need. It's amazing. It's incredible. Yes, yes, yes. But then I was in a problem, right? Because I wasn't ready to sell it. So how do I find out if she's just excited to be having the conversation, or whether she's actually a potential customer with intent to purchase? Because I've learned through hard experience that people getting excited about your idea has zero correlation with whether or not they're eventually going to buy. So I'm thinking, okay, what do I ask her for that she's only going to give me if she's serious? And typically these are commitments. There's time, reputation, money. And if you're selling to big businesses or governments, there's secrets about their buying process. So stakeholders, timelines, budgets, etc. So I was like, okay, I thought for a second, I'm like, okay, I'm going to ask her for some time, but she and I were getting along well. So her time, she might just hang out with me again to support me. So I was like, okay, her team's time, that adds a bit of a financial component to it also. So I said, listen, it's not ready yet. It's probably not going to be ready for 3 or 4 months. It sounds like it's important to you. If you want, I could come in and talk with the rest of your team next week and basically walk through the wireframes and make sure that this is actually going to fit into your workflow and solve your problems. Do you want to do that? And suddenly the whole tone of the conversation changes because we're not just having a fun chat about ideas. Suddenly I'm asking for something that she values, her team's time. She got all like, ah. And eventually, after like 30 seconds of dead silence, she goes, yes, this really matters. When can you come in? And it's like, aha, she's the customer. No money changed hands, but she'd committed a resource that showed intent to purchase. And so that's the way you get around this when you're still not quite ready to sell. It's like, you might not be ready to ask for money, but what can you ask for that still demonstrates intent to purchase, puts them in a buying decision, takes you out of the hypothetical.
The commitment, I think, is really important, Rob, right? Because sometimes we struggle when we don't have something tangible. So that's a perfect example of like, how do you ensure that you're not just faffing around with someone, that it's actually they're seriously considering buying. One thing you mentioned before was like,
sorry, let me just jump in 1 second. In traditional sales literature, if you're ever reading books about sales, they call this advancement. And the idea is it was a good meeting if it advances to the next stage toward a purchase. But the reason I don't like that or use it, it's true, it's accurate. It's just quite abstract. And so it's an idea that's very useful if you're an experienced salesperson. It's like, yeah, that advanced. But what I found as an optimistic founder is that I always thought the meeting advanced. Because I'm like, yeah, they liked me. They were happy. They said we were doing great stuff. That's advancement, right? And so I ended up with a lot of zombie leads in my pipeline who actually had no intent to purchase and who were draining my time. And as a small team, like you need those first 5 or 10 big customers, right? To like set up the credibility so that you can go into the mainstream. And so zombie leads who are polite and they're encouraging and they're friendly, but they're not going to be your first customer, very, very dangerous. So part of your job is to identify them and go like, okay, they might be a customer in 6 months, but they're not going to be our first customer. And then you can focus your limited attention on the people most likely to buy.
There's one question that I struggle always to ask, which is kind of that advancement question is like, is there someone else I should talk to? But really what you're asking is, can I talk to your boss? Is there a polite way to ask that?
To me, it's less about politeness, and it's more that every meeting you have to create an easy opportunity for the other party to reject you, because otherwise you're going to lose a lot of time on zombie leads. So you have to set yourself up for that rejection. And what allowed me to get comfortable with it, because I don't love sales or anything. I don't really like talking to strangers, but I have limited resources to allocate in my businesses, and I want to allocate them to the right places. I want to do the right feature requests. I want to serve the right customers, et cetera. So I'm like, okay, so if the job of the founder or the CEO or whoever is like essentially resource allocation, like how do you use this little group of people and time to do the most possible? Suddenly it's crucial. It is of strategic importance that you eliminate the people who aren't going to buy first. And so suddenly it's like, wow, this is existential. It doesn't really matter if I'm uncomfortable because my company's on the line. And it's way more uncomfortable to tell your investors that you lost their money and your friends that you have to fire them. And so once I had that framing, I was like, okay, I need to set myself up for an easy rejection every single conversation. Otherwise, I'm just not going to be able to allocate my resources correctly. So that's the way I forced myself into it. And one little mental trick I used is I put a little empty box, a little checkbox at the bottom of the page I would be taking my meeting notes on. And at the end of the meeting, if I'd asked for a commitment, whether they said yes or no, I could check it off. And it's like, yes, that was a good meeting. I set myself up for rejection, and I either found out they're serious or they're not. Good. And if I didn't fill that box, then I knew I'd been a coward. And I'd hurt my business and I'd hurt my team and I'd wasted because I was now misallocating my resources. I did that. In terms of politeness, sometimes you can tell that people just don't care. And in that case, I let them go. Like later on, this is maybe an important idea. When your company is early and you're still getting your first 5 or 10 customers, your goal is not to convince people. Your goal is to find people who really care. Because especially if you're selling to enterprises, there's so much inertia and friction against buying from an unproven startup. There's 10 different stakeholders. Any one of them can torpedo the deal. And so you're looking for that. Steve Blank, the dude who created customer development, which then became Lean Startup, he coined a separate name for them. He called them the early evangelists, which is even more aggressive than the early adopters. And it really feels like they're on your side of the table. It feels like they're opening the kimono and they're saying, okay, for this deal to go through, we're going to need to convince my VP of engineering, Steve. This is what Steve cares about. We're going to need to convince the VP of legal, Janet. Here's what Janet cares about. And suddenly it feels like you're no longer convincing them. They're working with you to help you understand the rest of the organization. They're very rare, but you almost need them with enterprise sales to get your first few sales, because otherwise there's just so much inertia against it. And so what I'm doing early on is like, I'm scanning for that. And if I see someone who seems disinterested, I don't want to force them to buy, because then you're stuck supporting a customer who doesn't love it, which is the opposite of product market fit, right? You're basically supporting legacy customers in an unscalable vision. If you have to convince each of them, you know, it's this hard personal sale. So you're looking for that they're on your side of the table is the best way I can explain it. And apart from that, what I try to do is I set the default to no. So I force them to say yes. I don't force them to say no. So if you say, we're going to meet again in 2 weeks, this is like a classic sales tactic, right? You like default to yes and blah, blah, blah. I don't like that in the early stages, because I don't want to waste another 2 weeks of time on someone who doesn't actually care enough to be my first customer. And so I'll default it to no. I'll say something like, listen, I know we're probably too early stage for you. Should we loop back in a few months, or would you prefer to pick it up more quickly than that and be one of our first customers? That's bad phrasing. Like, I'm not good at this stuff, improvising, so I plan it with my meeting ahead of time. I like write these crucial questions down and we kind of workshop them. We bounce back and forth. Oh no, that sounds weird. That sounds awkward. And then I'm like, okay, I've got that line. I don't do it for the whole meeting, but for the crucial asks, I find it helps me a lot. And then since I've defaulted it to no, if they say, no, we really want this, we want to be one of the first, let's go. Like, how soon can we get this? It's like, oh, okay. And then that changes the conversation.
Just talking about enterprise sale there, we had a conversation during the week about this. Like, how do you do customer discovery when you're doing an enterprise sale? Because you only will get one crack with these people a lot of the time, and you don't want to waste it.
So you're going to be burning bridges with the first few people you talk to in most cases, because you're not going to have your shit together. You're not going to know enough about the industry. You're not going to have credible answers. You're not going to have a clear enough understanding of exactly what your product is and why it matters in their language. And people in most cases aren't going to meet with you multiple times to hear a pitch or a demo or whatever. So what you do is a couple things. One, you accept that you're going to burn bridges, and this is okay. And you try to do it in a respectful and honest way. Like, you're basically in the early stages, there's an exchange of value in every conversation, right? Because the other party is giving you their time. Now, what are they getting in return for their time? Later on, they're getting the opportunity to see your product, which might solve one of their burning problems. But early on, before you're ready to sell, or while your product is still immature, what are they really getting? In most cases, what they're getting is going to be one of two things. Either they're getting a view on the future of their industry by seeing what you're working on. You're kind of a sign of the future. So they're curious to learn. It's like industry research. But more commonly, what they're getting is the chance to help you. And this is really transformational once you understand it, because it changes the way you write your emails, it changes what you ask for, and it changes the whole interaction. I see early founders so often. I used to do this all the time. I'd be thinking like, oh, I have nothing to give in return, and it would create this guilt complex. And then I was like, and already I'm on the back foot before I even started the conversation. But I've learned that people like helping founders. You're doing something exciting. They want to support you. What they don't want is their time to be wasted. And so this comes into, there's two concepts here. One is start with the friendly first contacts, because friendly people are happier to help you. And when you frame the conversation, make it clear how they're going to help you. This applies to everyone. Say, listen, we're still super early stage. We're trying to improve the solar and energy industry. We don't have anything to sell, but you know this industry better than anyone. If you were willing to spend 10 minutes just talking about how these decisions get made or how these budgets get allocated, it would help me out so much. It could save us months. And suddenly they're thinking, wow, 10 minutes of my time converts into months saved for this ambitious and wonderful entrepreneur. People love having that conversation. Whereas you will get 0% success if you say, hey, can I just pick your brain for 15 minutes? No one wants to do that because it doesn't look like you know what you need from them. When you say, hey, can we just chat? No, of course not. What do you want from me? Why can I, in particular, help you? So you need to walk this line. If you pitch your product, you've biased and ruined your feedback. But if you say nothing, you've guaranteed that they're going to decline the conversation. So you need to give them enough. I call it vision, framing, weakness, pedestal, ask is my acronym for it. And the vision is like, hey, I'm trying to improve this industry, or I'm trying to fix this problem. The framing is like, we don't have anything to sell, or maybe you do, or it's like, we have a product, but this isn't a sales meeting. I'm just desperate to learn. Then you put them on a pedestal while revealing your weakness. Hey, you know so much about this for these reasons. I'm having a nightmare figuring this out. You could help me out so much. Do you have 10 minutes? And that basically gives you an excuse to ask these open-ended questions. And that also reduces the number of bridges you're going to burn, because the only people who say yes, they know what they're getting into. The worst meetings I've ever had have been arranged under false pretenses, not intentionally, but they assumed that I was there to pitch something, and I assumed I was there to learn something. And because of that disconnect, they left unhappy. So I never got another meeting with them. Or they forced me into a pitch meeting I wasn't prepared for. So being able to frame these conversations as a learning conversation, it's probably the most important skill. You do it when you're sending your emails, and you also do it at the beginning of the actual conversation. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time. So as you remember, blah, blah, blah. And you basically just repeat what you said in the email.
The top tip. I need to go back and write everything down. But you mentioned one thing around framing that meeting. And when you, now the meetings are all remote, and that changes the dynamics of a meeting. So trying to find time to do a bit of learning can be more difficult. Do you have any kind of tips to optimize that remote transaction?
Yeah, it's actually amazing right now. If you read the book, I wrote the book in 2013, so a while ago. And in it, I said basically never do remote customer development. It doesn't work. And at the time, it did not. But what's happened since COVID is the culture and the expectations around Zoom calls has changed. So a few years ago, when people did remote calls, they always considered them a second-class citizen. Oh, excuse me. They always considered them a second-class citizen to an actual meeting. And they were basically treating them transactionally. Hey, we're doing a 10-minute call. Let's get business done and move on. And if you tried to say, hey, let me just ask you, how are you doing this? Why are you doing it that way? They would get very frustrated because they saw it as a waste of their time and they wanted to get business done and get off the call. Now that has changed, and people are taking remote calls as first-class citizens. And they're saying actually, this is how I'm going to meet this person. I can't meet them in person. So this is it. And they're happy to chat. They're happy to have these conversations. They're happy to spend a bit more time. And so nothing really needs to change about the techniques. The framing is increasingly important. Someone needs to take control of the meeting, not in I own the meeting sort of way, but in hey, this is what this is about. This is how you can help me. This is how long it's going to take. Is that cool? You need to set those expectations. And then having done that, you're able to have amazing learning meetings. And honestly, it's better. It's so good. There's some types of things that don't come up. I used to do a lot of my customer development in the pub when I was in London, because you're able to bring down the shields and learn all about their budgets and your competitors and all that stuff. Fine, that has a certain benefit, but it's a big time cost also. Whereas it used to take 4 hours for a custom meeting because you have to commute, you have to do your prep, your setup, every meeting lasts an hour by default. Whereas now, it's so much more efficient. One little trick I've been using, this is probably more for less for the enterprise sales companies. But if you're selling to individuals or businesses, I've been setting up a community, like a paid community for my customers. And basically, so right now, like the software, I'm working on a book and software about the same thing, and it's like to help authors. So I set up a community of authors to help them with the same problems. And so now I've got 100 people who every day are telling me their problems and asking me questions. And I'm like, oh, let's just jump on a quick call. And so actually community first startups are just like an absolute custom superpower right now. And again, that's only possible because of this remote shift. There are also some helpful apps like grain.co is one, and it gives you a little notepad for taking notes beside your Zoom calls. And it basically timestamps and then pulls out video clips of just the important pieces that you kind of timestamped so that you can share them with your team. There's a few others. There's some really helpful tools that reduce the time cost significantly.
Actually, that was a part of the book that I thought was quite interesting, is how you share your customer development with the team in a way that is accurate.
So no one's going to watch your full video interviews and no one's going to read your full notes, but they will read or watch the highlights, the good parts. And this is the correct way to share. What I try to do is share, the most interesting raw data from the conversation. And the reason for this is twofold. One, it forces you to take notes. If your team is expecting to see the highlights from every customer conversation that everyone on the team does, it creates this culture where you have to take notes. So asking bad questions is the first source of bias. Misremembering what happened is the second source. And then making bad decisions is the third source. If you have great data, but you make bad decisions, then it's kind of all pointless, right? So taking notes is really important for the second and the third problems. And to make better decisions, like, there's some stuff I'm good at, but there's a lot of stuff I'm bad at. And I don't necessarily trust my ability to make decisions. Like the whole point of having smart co-founders is so that you can use their brains. And so if you're doing the customer conversations and then you're making the decisions about what this means by yourself, you've essentially fired your co-founders. You're not using their brains. And so what I try to do is I try to load the raw data from what I've learned into everyone's brains, not my decision. I don't make any decisions. What I try to do is share the raw data. It's like, hey, they said this and I said this, and they seemed really angry. And like, this is what they're doing now. And they're kind of ignoring this part. Seems weird to me. And then once the data is in everyone's brain, suddenly we can make a much better decision together. This also helps with fundraising later because you've got a paper trail of everything you've learned. It's a very helpful process to start early. It's like, hey, this is our learning. How you record that, how you share it, up to you. I've tried so many different techniques. When I was co-located with my team, we did it on index cards, like where we would put like a small customer quote and an emoticon and like a date on each index card. And that was fun because we could shuffle them around, be like, oh, what are all the problems people told us in the last 8 months? And we can get out the box and look for all the ones with the problem emoticon on them. We tried digitizing it with a spreadsheet, but that was kind of like a little tedious, although it was lovely for digging through the data. I really like Grain and like the video highlights now. So basically the way we do it now is after each customer convo, my team's small. We've only got like 5 or 6 people right now. It's a pretty new company. But whenever any of us has a conversation with a customer or a partner or whoever, the highlights are going to get clipped out and dropped into our Slack. And because of the tooling and because we're doing it remote first, it's like the time cost is basically zero.
Okay. I think one of the things, Rob, and I think after this we'll go to breakouts, but one of the things that came up is if your company is post product market fit, what are the mistakes you see from customer development after that and customer discovery?
So basically, I mean, there's a few different answers. You're going to have to expand. So especially like if you're starting in Ireland, for example, or basically if you're starting anywhere that isn't America, like you're eventually going to have to expand into other countries. And there's small but important cultural differences and buying differences that can sink a product that was working well in its home country. And so you don't need to like start from scratch again, but it's really helpful if when you're expanding into new countries, if you can keep this culture of like, hey, let's like go learn, let's go talk to some people. And there's tons of examples. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but there's tons of examples of like successful non-US companies that like completely flubbed their US expansion because they were so confident that they had product market fit in their home country that they were like, we're past that. We don't need to learn anymore. But what I much prefer to see is if you have a weekly process, which is time efficient, which brings in a steady drip of customer learning to help you make your next set of important decisions. One of the misunderstandings about CustDev is that you do it all upfront, and that's just completely wrong. You're almost always going to be building your product and learning from customers together. And maybe early on, you're doing a 50-50 split. And then later on, it's like 80% product, 20% customers. It shifts over time, but you're always doing a bit of both. And another problem is just organizational inertia. So as the company grows, as you start to succeed, like some of my friends, I went through Y Combinator with them, the Songkick team, and they've since exited. They did pretty well. They were building an app for live music fans. Originally, the founding team were like absolute live music fanatics, right? So they had so much accrued customer understanding from their lives. One of the founders had been a DJ. Everyone on their early team was going to like 3 live shows per week. They just had the understanding. As the team grew, it was maybe 30, 50 people. Suddenly they had so many different decision makers and not everyone was as connected to that culture. Like even something small, like what text do we put on this button? Well, suddenly some programmer's just making that decision, right? And are they really the super live music fan who understands? And so everything kind of slowed down, and they had such a brilliant hack where on Friday afternoons, they started hiring bands to come play their office. And I shared an office with them, and it was super fun at the time. And they would also invite their most active local users. They'd say, hey, you're in London. Like, we saw you use our app a lot. We're throwing a party on Friday. You want to come? And so each week they would just have 50 customers or users come in and mingle with their 50 employees. No agenda. They'd pull people out. They'd say, hey, is it cool? We've got a new version of the app. If you want to take 20 minutes and see it, like we'd love to show it to you, see how it works. So they're doing their user testing. They had a permanent user testing room set up. On Mondays, the user testing team would show the highlight reel to the rest of the team at the Monday stand-up. So then suddenly the data is loaded into everybody's head. And with basically a 4-hour per week time cost, they exposed every single person on the team to real users. And like everything picked up. They had some other changes to make. It's like a tough transition point around 30 or 50 people. But that was certainly a contributing factor. So think weekly process. Don't think like get it done.
Yeah, I love that. I think any excuse to bring a band in on a Friday, really, and have a bit of a party, it's a great solution.
Yeah, okay, I mean, it's obviously situational, right? To your product, a party's not going to be the right tool for everyone. Another company, Resin, they did it by turning every feature request or support ticket into a customer learning opportunity. So basically, they just said, the developers have to do customer support, and if you've done the fewest tickets, you have to do customer support full time until you're not at the bottom of the leaderboard. And that was their way. And then they prep people. Hey, ask a couple questions. Why do you want this feature? What would this let you do? What are you going to do if we don't build it? Like, what are you doing now since it's not there? And then like, boom, again, it was pretty transformational for their business. It's just like, how do you expose every decision maker on the team to real customer insight in a time efficient way?
Yeah, I think if you crack that, like you're on a winning streak, right? Rob, we're going to go to breakout rooms now, and then we'll come back. Anyone that has questions for Rob, pop them in the chat. I see them coming through here now as well, which is great. And we'll see you back here in 15 minutes. The breakout rooms are specifically for sharing your experience, learning from others on the journey, learning about the wins, but also sharing the failures, because that's how we all learn. People are just coming back now. So this is our Q&A time. So the burning questions that were not answered in the breakout rooms will be answered now. So if you have questions, pop them in the chat. But I might pick on some of our facilitators to see who had good questions. Ian, how you doing? I love your background.
Like the background is awesome. I don't know if green is my color, but anyway. So everybody was very positive about the discussion, very great feedback. Some of the questions we came out with was, don't convince. What does that mean? Most people associate selling with convincing. So if Rob was able to speak a little bit more about that, we'd really appreciate it. And then this idea of, do it in person, get your weekly meetings in. How scalable is that if you're going to take Joe Haslam's advice from last month where you have to scale like crazy? And we had one great thing, pain storming. So Barry had heard this term where you don't ask people what's good or bad, ask them about all of their pain. So I'm going to be pain storming for the next few weeks. So thanks to Barry for that.
Rob,
I'm not sure I'll remember all the questions, but I'll cut into them and you can nudge me along. So you don't want to start optimizing for conversion until after product market fit, right? Because you don't want to be supporting customers with the wrong product. This is the worst thing. This is such a common trap. And for some reason, it strikes Europe especially hard, where you bend over so far backwards for your first 1 or 2 customers, even though they only kind of like it. And so you add this customization, et cetera, et cetera. Next thing you know, you're a glorified consultant with like 3 clients. And that's not a scalable business. You can't get your next round of funding. There's no productization. And so my view here is you want to start optimizing for conversion and sales and growth once you know you're building the right thing. But until that point where you're not sure if you're building the right thing yet, you want to be optimizing for figuring out if you're building the right thing. And in that case, the revenue is a byproduct of learning. It's not the goal. You know you're on the right track because people are paying you. But getting paid is not the point. It's a side effect. And that's where like the investors and the support and the bootstrapping or whatever else comes in. In terms of asking about pains, like, yeah, absolutely. I love it. Sometimes you can get into a bit too unguided of a conversation. If you're like, hey, tell me the worst parts of your day, you end up hearing about yesterday's annoyance with the laundromat instead of like something that you really want. And so the way I think about it is you're allowed to introduce bias to bring people back onto the topic you care about. I think about it like volleyball. So in volleyball, the ball comes over, someone like hits it up, then someone sets it into position so that someone else can spike it. The spike is the good learning question. It's like, yeah, like, give me my knowledge, give me my insight. The bounce and the set might be biasing questions. It's like, hey, you were saying something a minute ago about security I was super curious about. Would you mind telling me more about how you boom? That's like a bias-inducing question, but it brings them back onto the topic that you want to learn about. And so don't fall into the trap of being so open-ended that you let the conversation just go everywhere, because then you've got an infinite possibility space and it's really hard to build a company out of that. It's like bowling. You put the bumpers on the lane, right? And the ball bounces around inside of it. So it's like you bring them back onto the topic when you need to, and then, yeah, like dig into their problems. Oh, that sounds like it sucks. What are you doing about that? Oh, nothing. Why not? And then like the non-consumption is interesting. Are they doing nothing because they don't care? Or are they doing nothing because there's no good solutions? Very different answers.
That's great. So sales is psychology, and that's brilliant. Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Morris, you have a good question. I might bring you up to ask your question to Rob if you're with us.
Yeah, of course. No problem. Thank you. So my question was, in an end user are not the same person, where would you focus your attention?
Great question. And this applies to marketplaces. It applies to B2B to C, like anywhere where who you're selling to and who uses it are different people. Every enterprise sale is like this because you're selling to a VP, but it's getting used by people on the floor. Basically, they all matter, but some of them are going to be less risky than others. So in many cases, like the VP will be happy if it makes them more money, and they don't really care about the usability, or it improves retention or whatever metric they care about that they're buying it for. Whereas the frontline staff, so let's say it's banking software, the person who makes the purchase cares about, do we increase retention, revenue, et cetera. The person using it cares about, like, is it pleasant and convenient to use? And so they have different concerns, but the way I think about it is who can kill the deal. So if you're making a product for babies, obviously your economic buyer is the parent, but your end user is the baby. But if the baby hates the product, the parent will not buy it again and they will not recommend it. If the value proposition or the promise or the packaging is unappealing to the parent, the baby doesn't even get a chance to love it. So in that case, both the baby and the parent can torpedo the deal. They care about different things, but you need to understand both of them, right? And in some cases, it might be something you can learn from, and this is actually something important I should have said earlier. You cannot answer every question with customer development. There's a certain type of question you can answer by talking to people. There's other types of questions where you need a prototype. Like you're not going to get very far interviewing a baby. Like the baby needs the prototype, right? For the baby, it's all about user experience. For the parent, you could probably get like a decent information from the interview, right? Because like they have different things they care about. And so you treat each stakeholder, whether it's multiple stakeholders within one organization or whether it's the buyer, user, whatever, you treat each of them as someone important. Can they torpedo the deal? What do they care about? I need to understand it. How do I de-risk that? And basically for each extra person you have, you're just making your life more difficult. But sometimes that's like, you know, we need to deal with it to build the businesses we want.
That's great. Thanks, Rob.
Great question. Dave Carney, you have a really interesting question that is kind of a burning question for a lot of people, I'm sure.
Hey, Adun. Yeah, this is kind of a combination of two of the themes that we were talking about in our group. So basically, after you've spoken to a bunch of people and assuming you get a lot of really, really useful information, but maybe you've identified there's a couple of different personas there. At what point, where's the tipping point? Where's that threshold for starting to actually invest in product development? Because that's a roadmap thing and it's a time thing too, right?
Yeah, I absolutely don't have a scientific answer to this. For me, like, it probably depends on your personality as well and your business goals. Like some people are trying to really optimize and they're like, it has to be X billion dollars, et cetera, et cetera. Other people like, it just has to pay my rent. So like those sort of like the spreadsheet analysis to me, like help eliminate opportunities. But then what makes me feel say like, yeah, let's try it is, am I going to find it easy to get my first customer is really important to me, you know? And so like, I'm looking at, I think of it as the shape of the idea or the risk profile of the idea. There's a poker metaphor of like the table stakes, like how much do you need to spend just to get started in the game? And some ideas, the table stakes are like a week or a month. It's like, yeah, we just need a website or we just need, you know, whatever. Other times the table stakes are like 5 years. Like if you're doing heavy tech or something regulated like fintech. And so then, like, I don't know, like even people who are very scientific about this stuff, they still get it wrong a lot. So to me, like the question is much more personal. It's like, does this fit like the type of risk that I want? Do I want to spend like a month for a smaller opportunity or do I want to spend 5 years and gamble it all at once for like a potentially huge thing that's really hard to get into? I don't know. I will say if you have multiple different types of feedback coming from your early conversations, like as you mentioned, it's usually a sign that you've got multiple customer segments in there. So you were talking to universities, but actually there's different types of universities. And so it like the different clusters of feedback are revealing multiple customer segments hidden within one. And so then it's like, who do you start with? Well, okay, look at each of them separately. And again, you can strain this by the type of business you're trying to build, but like, all other things being equal, which is the easiest to access and which is going to be the most fun for the founding team? Because at a certain point, every startup gets really difficult. And if you find it easy and fun to get in touch with your customers, it's going to be much more likely that you survive that dip. But you know, some people are robots and they're happy to do hard things they don't care about.
We're going to wrap on the final question here. Patricia, you have a great question. I'm going to see if you're still here and you're happy to ask your question.
Gosh, give me just a second. I'm copying and pasting. Okay, here we go. I'm kind of working backwards now. I've put in quite a bit of time on the solution. We've tested it. We know it works, but I'm backtracking now to try and define the actual problem, which is bizarre, I know. But I'm having such difficulty with it. I would love to ask you if you have any pearls of wisdom to help me frame my problem when I don't know what my problem is, but I have the amazing solution.
Can you narrow slightly to industry or rough technology or something, just so that I pick a semi-relevant example?
It's an educational tool for learning disabled and autistic children to help them learn. And it's when they have difficulty with fine motor skills. So I've got to frame that all together.
All right, perfect. So then, this comes up. So like, if you read most like entrepreneurship books, you know, they'll say, you know, start with the customer, then get the problem, then build the solution. But in reality, this isn't always possible, especially in science and innovation driven products, where you often start with the innovation and then you're trying to figure out like, okay, what's the right place to put this in the world? Like I've been doing some stuff with Enterprise Ireland, and obviously this applies to like all of their businesses, right? Because it's like heavy science. So what you're looking to do. So first off, it's harder, right? It's not like the optimal way to do it, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. And in some cases it needs to be done.
I should just, if I could just interject for a second, it was invented by the mother of an autistic child. So it's built on that experience, and there is a solution there.
Yeah.
Now I come in and I'm doing the marketing and trying to bring it to life. I don't know how to frame the problem, if that helps you a little bit more now.
Yeah. So there's a question of like, I see these problems in terms of customer segments and budgets. Like, who's paying and who cares enough to research, find out about it, and then push it through the pipe. So for example, like who are all of the people who are decision makers in the life and health of, you know, an autistic child? Well, obviously you've got the parents, you've potentially got school teachers, you've potentially got private coaches or, you know, tutors, you potentially got doctors, you've potentially got hospitals or insurance companies. So like those are all potential stakeholders who might care, right? And then you go like, okay, like where do we go from there? But you're kind of like exploring this possibility space. It's a constrained possibility space. It's not infinite, but you're trying to find like, okay, who's the person who really cares? Like, is this going to reduce an insurance company's future liabilities regarding this person? If so, like, okay, how do we figure that out? Some of these you're going to be able to immediately eliminate. Then you go like, okay, maybe it's siblings. Then you go like, okay, is this for like, what age of child is this for? Is it for like, is it for, and then and you can keep niching down, right? You go like, okay, let's say it's for parents. Is it more appealing to parents who are homeschooling or parents who have their child off at a traditional school or a care facility? And as you keep niching down, what this is going to get you is hopefully you're going to find one of these sub segments who's highly motivated. And this applies to every product company. You're eventually going to have a large slice of customer segments, right? You're eventually going to have lots of people using you, like lots of people use Apple. But if you go way back, Apple started with these super geeky hobbyists. And so you're looking for that first toehold. And what like that allows you to get started. It allows you to hit break even. I have no idea who it would be, but like that's the way I would explore it. It's like I'd start with the big list of like who are all the people who care, and then like okay, of the ones that seem to care the most, how do I break them down? Of those, which care the most? The most. And then maybe that's where I start and focus my advertising spend, my content marketing, my partnerships, etc.
Thank you so much.
Patricia, I hope you found that useful. I'm going to send you a copy of the mom book, and Morris, I'm going to send you a copy of the mom test as well. So 2 copies going out to you guys. Conscious of time, we have 30 seconds, but before we wrap today, Fionnuala O'Callaghan, hats off. She keeps everything running in the background. Without her, we would be lost. To all our facilitators today, thank you so much, genuinely. And finally, to our fantastic speaker, Rob Fitzpatrick, I could genuinely listen to you all day. It has been an absolute pleasure. Guys, dates for your diary. Next Founder Circle is the 23rd. We're going to have a master of how to nail your narrative and sell to your customers. So next step on the journey on the 23rd, that's Jeannie Ranmel. And we'll see you all then. Until then, Rob, thank you very much. Have a lovely weekend, everybody. Good luck.